years passed for Dickelady in a quiet rhythm of work and friendship with the Thebolos. The crisis came with the eldest son, Banabothe. He had to take his primary school leaving examination at the end of the year. This serious event sobered him up considerably, as like all boys, he was very fond of playtime. He brought his books home and told his mother that he would like to study in the evenings. He would like to pass with a grade A to please her. With a flushed and proud face, Dickeldy mentioned this to Banabothe is studying every night now, she said. He never really cared for studies. I am so pleased about this that I bought him a spare lamp and removed him from the children's hut to my own hut where things will be peaceful for him. We both sit up late at night now. I sew on buttons and fix hems, and he does his studies. She also opened a savings account at the post office in order to have some standby money to pay the fees for his secondary education. They were rather high, rupees 85, but in spite of all her hoarding of odd cents, towards the end of the year, she was short on 20 rupees to cover the fees. Midway during the Christmas school holidays, the results were announced. Banavati passed with a grade A. His mother was almost hysterical in her joy at his achievement, but what to do? The two youngest sons had already started primary school, and she would never manage to cover all their fees from her resources. She decided to remind Garisego Mokupi that he was the father of the children. She had not seen him in 8 years except as a passerby in the village. Sometimes he waved, but he had never talked to her or inquired about her life or that of the children. It did not matter. She was a lower form of human life. Then this unpleasant something turned up at his office one day, just as he was about to leave for lunch. She had heard from village gossip that he had eventually settled down with a married woman who had a brood of children of her own. He had ousted her husband in a typical village sensation of brawls, curses, and abuse. Most probably, the husband did not care because there were always arms outstretched towards a man. As long as he looked like a man, the attraction of this particular woman for Garisego Mokupi, so her former lover said with a snicker, was that she went in for heady forms of love making, like a biting and scratching. Garisego Mokupi walked out of his office and looked irritably at the ghost from his past, his wife. She obviously wanted to talk to him, and he walked towards her, looking at his watch all the while. Like all the new success men, he had developed a punch. His eyes were bloodshot, his face was bloated, and the odor of the beer and sex from the previous night clung faintly around him. He indicated with his eyes that they should move around to the back of the office block, where they could talk in privacy. You must hurry with whatever you want to say, he said impatiently. The lunch hour is very short, and I have to be back at the office by 2. Not to him could she talk of the pride she felt Banavothi's achievement, so she said simply and quietly, Garisego, I beg you to help me pay Banawathi's fees for secondary school. He has passed with a grade A, and as you know, the school fees must be produced on the first day of school, or else he will be turned away. I have struggled to save money the whole year 8, but I am short of 20 rupees. She handed him her post office savings book, which he took glance at and handed her back to her. Then he smiled, a smirky know-all smile, and thought he was delivering her a blow in the face. When you don't, when don't you ask Paul Thevello for the money? He said. Everyone knows he is keeping 2 homes and that you are his payer. Everyone knows about that full bag of corn he delivers to your home every 6 months, so why can't he pay the school fees as well? As well. She neither denied this nor confirmed it. The blue glanced off her face, which she raised slightly in pride, then she walked away. As was their habit, the two women got together that afternoon, and Dicky reported this conversation with her husband to Penelope, who tossed her hair in anger and said fiercely, "The filthy pig himself, he thinks every man is like him. Does he? I shall report this matter to Paul, then he'll see something." And indeed, Garisuke did see something, but it was just up his alley. He was a female prostitute. He was a female prostitute in his innermost being, and like all professional prostitutes, he enjoyed publicity and sensation. It promoted his cause. He smiled genuinely and expensively when a madly angry Paul Thevelow came up to the door of his house where he lived with his concubine. Garasego had been through a lot of these dramas over those 8 years, and he almost knew by rote the dialogue that would follow. "You bastard," Paul Thevelow spat out. "Your wife isn't my concubine, do you hear?" "Then why are we keeping her in food?" Garisigo drawled. "Men only do that for women they fuck. They never do it for nothing." Paul Thevelow rested one hand against the wall, half dizzy with anger, and he said tensely, "You defile life, Garisigo Mokupi. There's nothing else in your world but defilement. Mama Banavati makes clothes for my wife and child and children, and she will never accept money from me, so how else must I pay her?" "It only proves the story both ways," the other replied, "Wiley, women do that for men who fuck them." Paul Thevelow shot out the other hand, punched him soundly in one grinning eye, and walked away. Who could hide a livid, swollen eye? To every surprised inquiry, he replied with an injured air, "It was done by my wife's lover, Paul Thevelow." It certainly brought the attention of the whole village upon him, which was all he really wanted. Those kinds of men were the bottom rung of the government. They secretly hungered to be the president with all eyes on them. He worked up the sensation a little further. He announced that he would pay the school fees of the child of his concubine, who was also to enter secondary school, but not the school fees of his own child, Banabote. People half liked the simmer, People half liked the smear on Paul Thevelow. He was too good to be true. They delighted in making him a part of the general dirt of the village. So they turned on Garasago and scolded, "Your wife might be getting things from Paul Thevelow, but it's beyond the purse of any man to pay the school fees of his own children, as well as the school fees of another man's children. Banavate wouldn't be there had you not procreated him, Garasago, so it is your duty to care for him. Besides, it's your fault if your wife takes another man. You left her alone all these years." So that story was lived with for 2 weeks, mostly because people want to say that Paul Thevelow was a part of life too, and as uncertain of his morals as they were. But the story took such a dramatic turn that it made all the men shudder with horror. It was some weeks before they could find the courage to go to bed with women. They preferred to do something else. Garasego's obscene thought process were his own undoing. He really believed that another man had a stake in his henpen, and like any cock, his hair was up about it. He thought he would walk in and re-establish his own claim to it. And so, after 2 weeks, mm, the swelling in his eye had died down. He spied Banabothe in the village and asked to take a note to his mother. He said the child should bring a reply. The note read their mother to their mother, I am coming home again so that we may settle our differences. Will you will you prepare a meal for me and some hot water that I might take a bath? Gare. Dickie took the note, read it, and shook with rage. All its overtones were clear to her. He was coming home for some sex. They had had no differences. They had not even liked each other. Banabuthe, she said, will you play nearby? I want to think a bit, then I will send to your father with the reply. Her thought processes were not very clear to her. There was something she could immediately touch upon. Her life had become holy to her during all those years. She struggled to maintain herself and her children. She had filled her life with treasures, kindness, and love she had gathered from others, and it was all this that she wanted to protect from defilement by an evil man. Her first panic-striking thought was to the children and flee the village. But where to go? Garasaku did not want a divorce. She had left him to approach her about the matter. She had desisted from tiring any other man. She turned her thoughts this way and that and could find no easy out except to face him. If she wrote back, don't you dare put foot in the yard, I don't want to see you, he would ignore it. Black women didn't have that kind of power. A thoughtful, brooding look came over her face. At last at peace, at last at peace with herself, she went to her hut and wrote a reply. So, I shall prepare everything as you have said. Dikildi. It was about it was about midday when Banamati sped back with the reply to his father. All afternoon, Dikildi busied herself making preparation for the appearance of her management at the massive preparations, the large iron water pot full of water with the burning under it, fire burning under it, the extra cooking pots on the fire. Only later Penelope the brought the knife into focus, but it was only a vague blur. A large kitchen knife used to cut meat, and Dickledy knelt at a grinding stone and sharpened it slowly and methodically. What used and focus then was the final and tragic expression on the upturned face of her friend. Threw her into confusion and blocked their usual free and easy feminine chatter. Then Nikili said, I am making some preparation for Garasego. He is coming home. Tonight, Penelope beat a hasty retreat to her own home terrified. They knew they were resolved because when she mentioned this to Paul, he was distracted and uneasy for the rest of the day. He kept on doing upside down sorts of things, not replying to questions absent-mindedly leaving a cup of tea until it got quite cold. And every now and again he stood up and paced about, lost in his own thoughts. So deep was there a rise of disturbance that towards evening they no longer made a pretense of talking. They just sat in silence in their hut. Then, at about 9 o'clock, they heard those wild and agonized billows. They both rushed out together to the yard of Tikildi Mokopi. He came home He came home at sunset and found everything ready for him as he had requested, and he settled himself down to enjoy a man's life. He had brought a pack of beer along and sat outdoors slowly savoring it while every now and then his eyes swept over to Thavolo yard. Only the women and children moved about the yard. The man was out of sight. Garasago smiled to himself, pleased that he could crow as loud as he liked. No answering challenge. A basin of warm water was placed before him to wash his hands, and then Dikildi served him as meal. He served him his meal. At a separate distance, she also served the children and instructed them to wash and prepare for bed. She noted that Garasago displayed interest in the children whatsoever. He was entirely wrapped up in himself and thoughtful only of himself and his own comfort. Any tenderness he offered the children might have broken her and answered her mind away from the deed she had carefully placed. All that afternoon, carefully planned. All that afternoon, she was beneath his regard and noticed too for when she eventually brought her own plate of food. She was beneath his regard and noticed too for when she eventually brought her own plate of food and sat near him. He never once glanced at her face. He drank his beer and cast his glance every now and again at the Thabelo yard. Not once did the man of the yard appear until it became too dark to distinguish anything anymore. He was completely satisfied with that. He could repeat the performance every day until he broke the metal of the other cock again and forced him into anger abuse. He liked that sort of thing. Garasago, do you think you could help me with Banamotha's school fees? Nikhildi asked at one point. Oh, I'll think about it, he replied casually. She stood up and carried buckets of water into the hut, which she poured into large tin bath that he might bathe himself. Then while he took his bath, she busied herself cleaning up and completing the last of the household chores. Those done, she entered the children's hut. They played hard during the day and they had already fallen asleep with exhaustion. She knelt down their sleeping mats and stared at them for a long while with an extremely tender expression. Then she blew out their what I couldn't read. Then she blew out their lamp or what and walked to her own hut. Garasiku lay sprawled across the bed in such a manner that indicated he only thought of himself and did not intend sharing the bed with anyone else. Satiated with food and drink, he had fallen into a deep, heavy sleep the moment he'd had touched the pillow. He, his concubine had no doubt taught him that correct way for a man to go to bed was naked. So he lay unguarded and defenseless, propped across the bed on his back. The bath made a louder clatter as Dickie removed it from the room, but still he slept on, lost to the world. She re entered the hut and closed the door. Then she bent down and reached for the knife under the bed, which she had merely concealed with the cloth. With the precision and skill of her hard-working hands, she grasped hold of his genitals and cut them off with one stroke. In doing so, she slit the main artery, which ran on the inside of the groin. A massive spurt of blood arched its way across the bed. Garasagu bellowed, and he bellowed his anguish. Then all was silent. She stood and snatched his death anguish with an intent and brooding look, missing not one detail of something. The door steered her out of her reverie. It was the boy, Banavati. She opened the door and stared at him, speechless. He was trembling violently. Mother, he said in a terrified whisper, didn't I hear father cry? I have killed him, she said, waving her hand in the air with a gesture that said, well, that's that. Then she added sharply, Banavati, go and call the police. He turned and fled into the night. A second pair of footsteps followed hard on his wheels. It was Penelope running back to her own yard, half out of her mind with fear. Out of the dark, Paul Thabulo stepped towards the hut and entered it. He took in every detail, and then he turned and looked at Dikildi with such a tortured expression that for a time words failed him. At last he said, you don't have to worry about the children, Ma Banamuthi. I'll take them as my own and give them all a secondary school education. Word notes and annotations. Botswana. Botswana is a landlocked country in southern Africa. It has a landscape defined by the Kalahari Desert and the Okavango Delta, which becomes a lush animal habitat during the seasonal floods. The massive Central Kalahari Game Reserve, with fossilized river valleys and undulating grasslands, is home to numerous animals, cheetahs, hyenas, and wild dogs. Concubine, a woman who lives with a man but has lower status than his wife or wives. Smarky, to smile in a way that expresses satisfaction or pleasure about having done something or knowing something that is not known by someone else. Miscarriage, spontaneous expulsion of a human fetus before it is viable, and especially between the 12th and 28th weeks of gestation. Abortion, it is a procedure to end a pregnancy. It uses medicine or surgery to remove the embryo or fetus and placenta from the uterus. The procedure is done by a licensed healthcare professional The decision to end a pregnancy is very personal. Samp, coarsely ground Indian corn, or a kind of porridge made from it. Hmm. A woman supervisor to look after the female prisoner. Wardress. Wardress, a woman supervisor to look after the female prisoners in a prison. The story in brief, the centerpiece of this collection is the title story. It is a scathing indictment of Botswanan men and their treatment of the women in their lives. The story revolves around the central character Dikiledi and her relationship with her husband Garesego, which is a stark contrast to the marriage of their neighbors Penelope and Paul. Bessie Head's vignette of a village woman abandoned and abused by her husband begins in Media's Race. In the first of the story's four sections, Nikki is on her way to prison in Gaborone, the country's new capital city. From her village, Puling, she is accused manslaughter, killed her husband, and is sentenced for life. Nikki is placed with four other women who have also murdered their husbands. We learn that Dikedi has a number of skills. She could knit, sew, and weave baskets and has provided for the family by using these skills when her husband abandoned her. We learn that Dikili has a number of skills. She could knit, sew, and weave baskets, and has provided for the family by using these skills when her husband abandoned her. In the second part of the story, the narrator indicates that there are two different types of men, one being compared to dogs, Tickley's husband, and the other being poem of tenderness, Paul Thebelow. Paul Thebelow and his wife are new neighbors to Dickley. Dickley offers help in building their house, and Canopy and Dickley become best friends who share everything with each other. In the third section, after 8 years of African independence, Dickley has to be Garasago for money to pay for the eldest child's education, as the money she has collected over the years is not sufficient. Garasago believes that Dickley is Paul's concubine, as then he refuses to provide money due to that. Later, he requests Dickley to mark, prepare him a dash. I have no idea. Prepare him a bath and for him through a letter indicated that all he wanted was a sexual relation. In the final section, we see Dikildi preparing for Garasagu's arrival. She has planned to kill him with a meat cutting knife. She may have changed her mind show interest if he had showed interest in their children, but he didn't. After Garcegos has a bath and falls asleep, Dikildi cuts off his genitals, and after he is dead, she tells her son to call the police. Paul and Penelope, knowing ahead that something negative was brewing in Dikildi's mind, rush to the scene. Dikildi's heart rushed to the scene after observing that what had happened. He assured that he would take care of her children as if they were his own. The other stories in The Collector of Treasures are Jacob, the story of a faith head priest, life, witchcraft, goat law, the wind and a boy, snapshots of a wedding, the special one, etc. Critical analysis of the story. On her way to prison in the police van, Dikildi discovers, like all those driven the age, the need to again. Her interior landscape is projected onto the land in powerfully evocative scene. At first, faintly on the horizon, the orange glow of the city lights of the Independence town of Gaborone appeared like an astonishing phantom in overwhelming darkness of the bush until the truck struck tiered roads, neon light shops and cinemas and made the bush a phantom amidst a blur of light. Here at the liminal stage where bush and city exchange a ghostly reality, harsh journey moves to its conclusion. A rude arrival and ruder awakening await Dikiladi prior to her own own to her transformation. All this passed untimed, unwatched by the crumpled prisoner. She did not stand the truck. She did not look the struck fine drawn to a halt outside the prison gates. The torchlight struck there of her face like an agonizing blow. Thinking she was asleep, the policeman called briskly, "You must awaken now. We have arrived." Though she is crumpled in despair, she is not asleep and has indeed arrived at the destination, the ultimate outpost of male authority and power, the proper site for her ultimate refusal to comply with male authority. Digildi's last stop is to be marked by the community of like minded women who also found the courage to fight back and who were excluded and confined under the hegemony of the male judge and warden. There, Dikildi, a collector of treasures, finds the place for love, caring, and giving denied her by a patriarchal society. At the beginning of the story, we are filled with questions. Not only is it of what awaits Tickle in prison, but also of the reason she is in prison. We learn that her husband, who has destroyed her family, is murdered by Dikildi, leading us to conclude that she is in a melancholic state. At the end of the story, which is not in chronological order, we learn that Dikildi finds light in the darkest moments and does not dwell upon the negative aspects of her life. She finds happiness even in prison. In the end of the story, we learn that a man, her husband, tried to destroy her family, but also it was a man, Paul Thebolo, who was the savior of her family. Who shall take care of her children on she is in prison? At the end, transformed by the telling, she is no longer Dekildi, but a Ma Panabothe, both mother of her children and killer of their father. Her story ends with the pointers that indicate where that terrible combination must lead her exclusion and simultaneously self fulfillment. Dekildi and the other struggling women of Bessie Head's fiction move between two worlds in which the line of change defines the ultimate borders. Themes of the story: trauma of women. With Bessie Head and ironic fatalism governs these women's lives, seen in the gap between the narrative point of view and those of the characters. Gareth Hevitch's Christian faith in heaven is not closed, is described as sincere and heartfelt by a narrator whose sympathies are closer to Gallant Bage's non-Christian, skeptical husband. More often, the irony stems from the internal gap inherent in the position of the women themselves, caught in a network of social custom and constraint. The women in Head stories experience moments of transition, blasphemy, violence, and death, either because of the strength of their desire, as with Glethevage, Life, or Rangvana in the Deep River, or because of their insistence upon preserving integrity and independence, as with Life, Dikildi and Mabile. The conflicts often occur within the characters themselves, even when external constraint is brought to bear. What emerges in a pattern of struggle between powerful repressive forces and equally adamant drives grounded in desire and refusal. Next is women's resistance. Bessie Head takes us to limits in which the boundary is a warning of the dangers of refusal, but also a refusal of that warning in the story of the excluded wife, Dikildi, in The Collector of Treasure. She refuses to accept her husband's insistence that she be a good wife, that she prepare him his meals and bath, and serve him in bed regardless of his own conduct and relationships with other women. Dickley pushes her refusal to the limits and in the process attacks phallocracy at its root, sexual domination, again reminding us of that the sexual patterns of a society reflect the link between boundaries and power. Although presented as the aggrieved party, Dikildi fails to make the transition from wife as mother to wife as lover. Thus, she fails to place Garisago's needs before hers or her children's, and when Garisago attempts to assert his prior claims, he is killed. Next is role of power and gender in the story. The day duty wardress rattled the key in the lock and led them out into the small concrete courtyard. This represents women oppressing women. Women who believe that men are superior and submit to their husbands not out of free will but because of tradition, are further perpetuating the idea that women are inferior beings. In doing so, they do contribute to the oppression of not only the themselves but other women. This is shown by the majority of the prison guards being women. It is their job to keep the women locked in prison, which is symbolic of keeping women oppressed. When Nikilni Mugipi is taken to prison, she is informed that there are four other women in prison for the same crime of killing their husbands. The guard says it's becoming the fashion these days, dismissing the crime as if it's a fad and the women had no valid reason to kill their husbands. This comment, although seemingly innocuous, shows that women aren't regarded as rational and that they are not taken seriously. Head writes that there are only two kinds of men in society. The first kind of men are men who behave like animals, who accept no responsibility for their young and who make females abort. That kind of man live near the animal level and behave just the same. Since that kind of man was in the majority in society, he needed a little analyzing as he was responsible for the complete breakdown of family life. The other kind of men are men with the power to create themselves anew and who are poems of tenderness. Head goes on to explain that because men were so rigidly controlled, either by tradition or society, they feel the need to prove their masculinity by controlling someone else's women. She also says that men began to abuse their freedom and took advantage of the power they were awarded by their ancestors who insisted that women were inferior beings. This breakdown of men is important because Head explains why certain men act the way they do. Head portrays both kinds of men in this vignette. Dekildi's late husband is the type of man she likens to an animal, while Penelope's husband is a good man, the man who turned all his resources, both emotional and material, towards his family life. The man handed each woman a plate of porridge and a mug of black tea. Here we see that the men give the women sustenance. They feed them, but that sustenance is not nutritious or good. This portrays life in the traditional villages where the men are the breadwinners and they are supposed to provide for the women, but that does not necessarily mean that they do it well. Like the imprisoned women has husbands, their husbands were supposed to provide for them, but they were abusive and uncaring. Bessie is commenting on how the women are taught to be dependent on the males even if they are not doing their jobs well. The prison is inherently sexist. The women are made to do stereotypical women's work while the men do stereotypical men's work, further increasing the divide between the social equity of genders. The women produced garments of cloth and wool. The men did carpentry, shoemaking, brick making, and vegetable production. This separation of tasks by gender portrays women as weak and in some ways unskilled, suggesting that they do not have the strength or the mental capacity to perform the tasks that the men do. Head writes that there are only two kinds of men in society. The first kind of men are men who behave like animals, who accept no responsibility for the young, and who make females abort. That kind of men live near the animal level and behave just as the same. Since that kind of man was in the majority in society, he needed a little analyzing as he was responsible for the complete breakdown of family life. The other kind of men are men with the power to create themselves anew and who are poems of tenderness. Head goes on to explain that because men were so rigidly controlled, either by tradition or society, they feel the need to prove their masculinity by controlling someone else's women. She also says that men began to abuse their freedom and took advantage of the power they were awarded by their ancestors, who insisted that women were inferior beings. This breakdown of men is important because Head explains why certain men act the way they do. Head portrays both kinds of men in this vignette. Decalabri's late husband is a type of man she likens to an animal, while Cannabis' husband is the good man, the man who turned all his resources, both emotional and material, towards his family life. Well, I'll finish now.